Well, in the USA, the price of oil has collapsed to a record low as demand dries up and storage runs out. The price of a barrel of West Texas Intermediate, which is the benchmark for US oil, today traded as low as minus $40 a barrel. It's the first time the price has turned negative in history. It led to a day of chaos in the oil market. So let's talk to our business correspondent in New York, Michelle Fleury. Essentially, producers are paying to offload the oil, Michelle.
Yeah, I mean, this is unprecedented what you're seeing in the oil industry. Chaos that hasn't existed as far back as people have been recording the price of oil. Now, what has happened is that with all of us staying home, not driving around, not getting on planes, demand has essentially vanished. The result, around the world, there is too much crude oil. And so today what we saw is a drop in the price of a key US benchmark, West Texas Intermediate, to below zero. Again, this has never been seen before. And what it means is that traders are essentially paying to get rid of this oil, that there is so much that is being stored because people just aren't buying the oil, that refineries aren't taking this oil, that they are saying, well, we don't want any new deliveries in the month of May. Now, we're not expecting to see any recovery until there is a pickup in demand. And of course, that will depend on how this health crisis unfolds.
Michelle, once again, thanks very much, Michelle Fleury, for us there in New York. Around the world, some countries are confident that they have reached their highest number of infections and passed the peak, so they're starting to ease restrictions and move towards ending their lockdowns. New Zealand today announced that rules on local travel will be relaxed, and this follows some easing in Germany and in Denmark too. What happens next is likely to be keenly watched by governments around the world, as our science editor David Schuckman tells us.
Even when the worst seems to be over, the virus remains a threat. In China, the authorities are still on their guard, checking for fever, a common symptom of COVID-19. Every government is now trying to work out what to do next. New Zealand is held up as an example of a country that's got it right so far. It cut itself off from the rest of the world. An extreme lockdown was introduced rapidly, and cases and deaths have been kept unusually low. So the Prime Minister has announced the first cautious moves to open up.
We believe that decisive action, going hard and going early, gave us the very best chance of stamping out the virus. And it has. We have done what very few countries have been able to do. We have stopped a wave of devastation.
In Europe, Germany is seen as a model for how to handle the virus. It's leading the way in testing. In Munich, this team is checking 1,000 people for antibodies to discover who's been infected. Right from the start, mass tests were seen as vital, and now, like in New Zealand, there's a first step to reopening. Julia Gless runs a shop in Heidelberg. Closed for weeks, she's now got permission to start again. This time from behind a protective screen, and with only one customer allowed in at a time. Do you think it's the right time in Germany for shops like yours to reopen?
Yes, I think so, because if we couldn't do that, it would be very, very difficult to exist. It's maybe more important for the small businesses.
But what's happening in Japan shows the risk of easing measures too soon. Controls were introduced, but then relaxed, only for cases to rise sharply again. And the World Health Organization is warning countries against moving before they're fully prepared.
Please make sure you've got the defences in place at the community level. Please make sure that everybody knows that what their responsibility is. Please make sure that older people are given special care and attention. Please make sure that hospitals are got ready.
Japan's hospitals are now struggling. They're short of personal protective equipment. The government there is accused of assuming they've got the outbreak under control. David Schuckman, BBC News.
Well, the Prime Minister is still at his country residence, Chequers, recovering from the effects of coronavirus. He's said to be getting daily updates on the government's response. Downing Street said today that Mr Johnson's priority was to prevent a second peak of coronavirus, something he was just talking about. He's said to be very wary of relaxing the restrictions too early. Let's go live to Westminster and our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. What's your latest reading of the government's response, Laura?
Well, I think here, as you suggest, is overriding caution across government tonight of starting to tweak or lift any of the restrictions too early, because at this stage it just seems that that would be a risk that is not worth taking, a risk of a second deadly spike that not just would have a cause of a loss of life, but also would in time create more disruption for the economy and of course for the country in terms of being able to climb out of this anytime soon. And of course the government is at the moment experiencing a lot of pressure, particularly on that issue of protective kit for people in hospitals and in care homes, those caring for the sick. And insiders do acknowledge, well, perhaps they should have grappled and really tried to grip up this particular issue earlier on. But what people in government absolutely are adamant about is any suggestion that they weren't taking this seriously until recently. They say they're now working absolutely flat out to try to make sure that everything is in its place, and beyond concerns about protective equipment or about the speed of testing not being ramped up quickly and as many people would desire, are on the two big aims that the government set out at the beginning of all of this: slowing the spread of the disease. Well, we know from the recent flattening of the numbers that seems to be happening, and stopping the NHS from being completely overwhelmed. That too seems like it has been avoided, and a few short weeks ago it wasn't inevitable that either of those things would happen.
Laura, once again, many thanks. Laura Kuenssberg there at Westminster. Now, as we've heard, the price of US oil has collapsed as demand falls because of the ongoing crisis, and unemployment has rocketed, with more than 22 million Americans filing for unemployment benefits in the past month. Protesters have taken to the streets in states across the US, demanding an end to the stay-at-home measures and the reopening of the economy. Our North America editor, John Sopel, has the story.
Like wildfire, a series of demonstrations has erupted across the country to protest at the stay-at-home order, to protest at the closure of the US economy, to protest at what these people see as unacceptable government interference in their lives. And they don't seem much interested in maintaining social distancing. This person carries the placard, "Give me liberty" or "Give me COVID-19. He may end up with both.
Now I think it's time for the government to allow us adults to make the decisions of what businesses they want to open. If they want to open up.
We should open up yesterday. It never should have closed. It's a hoax.
It's the facts of life. We live and we die. So to shut down the economy because of that is insane.
Fuel for these protests was provided in a series of tweets by the president, urging citizens to liberate their states from overzealous governors. The governors are aghast that in the midst of coronavirus, they're now having to deal with protesters.
This is not the time for protest. This is not the time for divisiveness. This is time for leadership that will stand up and provide empathy, that will understand what's going on in this country of ours.
Please, go ahead. But when I spoke to the president, he was unconcerned. If there were groups of people planning to protest tomorrow against the government shutdown, what would be your advice?
You're allowed to protest. I mean, they feel that way. I watched the protest and they were all 6 feet apart. I mean, it was a very orderly group of people. But, you know, some governors have gone too far. Some of the things that happened are maybe not so appropriate. And I think in the end it's not going to matter because we're starting to open up our states. And I think they're going to open up very well. As far as protesters, you know, I see protesters for all sorts of things. And I'm with everybody. I'm with everybody.
A twist, though. In Denver, Colorado, health workers on the front line of the fight against coronavirus tried to stop the protesters, who see themselves as the vanguard for individual liberty. 4 weeks of lockdown and tensions are building. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.